Hi guys, it's Melissa from Special Ed Law Mom. Yes, you're seeing me in the same clothes. I'm doing a bunch of videos at once today. This is part 3 in my dispute resolution series of dispute resolution options that you have under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So in my first video, you'll have to check that out. We talk about facilitated IEP meetings. Basically, let's sing Kumbaya and try to get along. Then mediation, which is where a decision maker goes in, looks at a situation and weighs the options of providing whatever it is the parent wants versus the cost of fighting the parent, and you can hopefully get some resolution there. The third option is mediation, and I was just talking about that, and I forgot to include something in that. So with mediation, what happens is if you come to an agreement, then the mediator writes up a legally binding document that spells out that agreement. And if they don't honor it or they fail or whatever, you can go straight to civil court and sue them. You don't have to go through IDEA. You don't have to do any of that. If you went through the hassle of mediation and you got them to agree to something and they don't do it, you can take it right to civil court. With my next remedy, which is a due process hearing, you can't do that. So that's an important distinction between the two. The other thing is with mediation, you cannot share any information that was shared in mediation. It's all considered confidential. So you're not going to be given, well, you might be given notes of some kind or something, but those cannot be used as exhibits in a due process hearing or a state complaint or any of those things, okay? All right. So what we're going to talk about now is the due process hearing. Now, I have done all of these remedies, all of them. I've done due process 3 times. We sued our school system 3 times in 3 years. I'm going to just tell you about due process, and then hopefully I'll not go too long and I can share a couple stories with you. So, due process is where you're filing a lawsuit against the school district, but you're not allowed to file it in civil court. You have to file it through the State Office of Education, and they assign a hearing officer who's a lawyer to act as the judge. And then you usually have attorneys. You don't have to. You can represent yourself, but you'll get eaten alive. And I have a legal background, and I even know that you'll get eaten alive. And so there's usually attorneys involved. You'll have witnesses that come in and testify during the hearing, and they'll have witnesses, sometimes their own staff, sometimes they'll pay an outside expert to come in and testify. So you're paying for an attorney, you're paying for expert witnesses, and you're basically suing the school system, telling them, you did something wrong. And so in your due process complaint that you file, you have to list all of the violations that you believe occurred. You can't add them in later. So you want to make sure that you've thought it through, that you've worked with your attorney, that you can try to amend it later, but the other side can say no. So it's just easiest if you don't jump the gun and file it, within 2 hours of an IEP meeting, and you think it through and do all of that. Then what happens is, I'm a little rusty on this, so I have to think it through. I believe there's specific timelines, and those will be outlined in the special ed law book. There's specific timelines where you have to come together and basically have a forced mediation session. Just like the mediation that I talk about in part 1 that I just mentioned at the beginning of this video, where there can be a legally binding document drafted that you can take to regular court if they don't honor it. It's the same thing. They just threw it in as part of the due process procedure to try to see if they can get you to mediate and resolve the issue before everyone goes to the hassle and expense of due process. So after that, then you will work with your attorney, they will work with their attorney, and then you gather evidence and all sorts of things. And then there's a timeline a few days before, I want to say 3 to 5 days before your hearing date, where you have to exchange exhibits. So you give them all of your exhibits, they give you all of their exhibits, and then you can use those. You look through them, you can use them to see, oh, they're going to try to use this angle or that angle, and it can help you prepare for the hearing. Then you go into the hearing. We filed 3 times in 3 years, but we only had one official hearing, which was our last filing, and it was a 4-day 8 to 5 hearing. It was intense. Yeah, I'll have stories about that. But so you go into the hearing, and the parent or whoever has filed for the due process, which 99% of the time is the parent, presents their side first, presents all of their witnesses, and then they have a chance, their side has a chance to cross-examine everyone and all of that. And then you rest your case, and then they present their side, and then there's closing arguments. And after that, everybody submits a final, I can't think of the word. Oh, I'm bugged by that. A final document. Each attorney submits a final document. There's an official name, but to the judge, summarizing their case of why they should prevail. And then the judge issues a written decision. Now you can appeal that. You can appeal that higher. But let me tell you, in our case, I worked as the paralegal. I found an attorney who realized I knew the law just as well as she did, and we connected really well. And she knew that money was at a premium. And so she allowed me to work as the paralegal. And I set up a card table in our living room, and I went through, I can't even imagine, probably thousands of documents, going through to find exhibits for our hearing. And so anyways, I did that, and that helped save on her paying someone else to do that. So it helped our bill. But even with that, our fee with her for that 4-day hearing was $25,000. And then I had expert witnesses. One testified by phone because I wasn't willing to fly her here. And we had another one who came, who actually waived his fee because he was so disgusted by the school system. But I didn't know he was waiving his fee until after the fact. It was very kind of him. So there's different people that we had to pay for. And so our bill was quite expensive for that due process hearing. But I will tell you, the greater toll on my family was the stress of that hearing. I spent we prepared for a month before our attorney filed. So we knew exactly what we had to go off of. And then I had to find the documents to match the violations. And I have a pretty good recall memory. And we had over 200 exhibits. We would have had more had I done it a little different, but we had over 200 exhibits, those big white Costco binders. And I could tell you where anything was in each of those. It was amazing. That was a very life-changing thing for me. And I'm sorry if I get a little emotional. I truly believe God was with me in that room. We did not prevail. And my kids will tell you that my memory is not the best, especially as I get older. But I could recall every single one of those documents. And those documents weren't just like a 3-line document. I mean, some of them were 15 pages long. An exhibit could be 15 pages long, 30 pages long. And if something came up, I knew exactly what exhibit it was in. And my attorney would just turn to me and look at me, and I'd go, bingo, pull the binder and pull it out. It was incredible. And I truly believe God was in that room with me, because when that hearing was over, the strength that I had and the recall that I had in that hearing, I've not had since. So you can have your different opinions. I don't know if you're religious or not. It doesn't really matter. I'm not trying to make this religious. I believe that sometimes people go through things to show other people's true colors. And that happened in our hearing. There were people that had the opportunity to tell the truth, and some did. And there were people that chose to lie. And whatever happens to them is not mine to say. But I do believe it can be a very powerful experience, but it also takes a huge toll on your family, a huge toll, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Now, the very first time that we filed for due process, and I know I'm at 10 minutes, so I'll try to make this fast. The very first time that we filed for due process, our school district had changed. The boundaries, we had not moved, but the boundaries had changed, and we were working with a new group of people. And the old school system that we were in provided an aid for our daughter. But the new school system that we were in, because of the boundary change, didn't want to provide an aid for our daughter. They'd never worked with our daughter. They didn't want to provide an aid for our daughter. They said that they would when they met with the old system. But a month into becoming the new system, they were already questioning. It was in the middle of the summer, so they weren't even working with our daughter. They were already questioning if she needed an aid. And so the first month of school, they called us in for an IEP meeting. And as expected, they tried to pull the aid. Well, this mama wasn't going to go for that. This kid's in a new school. First time she has an aid, she's in a regular classroom. You're not going to pull my daughter's aid without evidence to show me that she's going to be okay. They couldn't give me any evidence. In fact, the special ed director was there, and she told me that they would give me the evidence after the fact. And I said, no, you need to justify the evidence now to pull that aid. And they weren't going to let the aid just slowly fizzle out. No, that aid was gone the next day. When my daughter went to school the next day, there would be no more aid, which was not okay with me. So with due process, there's a thing called stay put. And what happens is when you file that due process, everything stays as it is until you've either settled or the hearing is over with and a ruling has been made. Everything stays as is. So I went home that night. Now, remember, I told you not to file a due process within 2 hours of an IEP meeting. But our issue was simple. They weren't letting us participate. They weren't providing what they needed to. They couldn't show anything to show that she didn't need the aid. And so I went home that night and I filed due process. And what that did was it made the aid have to stay in place. That was my ultimate goal. I wanted that aid. If the aid needed to fade out, I had no problem with that. My problem was with removing the aid overnight. And I wasn't going to let that happen. And I knew well enough that I could stop that by filing the due process. So I filed the due process and we started the whole thing where we had to go into the mediation. We had to do this. We had timelines. We had this. We had that. And it was going into Christmas time, and people were going on trips, and it was the holidays, and nobody really wants to be in a due process, and the hearing officer was busy, and this, that, the other. And so our hearing date was not set until January. So this was in September when I filed, the end of September, and our hearing date wasn't until January. Well, during that time, exactly what I wanted to happen happened. And the aid slowly pulled back, but she was still there. My daughter still knew she was there, but she slowly pulled back. And my daughter was able to step forward and be successful, less and less time with the aid. Exactly what I wanted. So when it came time for our hearing, what was I going to a hearing for? Because I had just accomplished what I wanted to with the stay put. So I withdrew our hearing. And they mad. I did it just days before the hearing, right after Christmas. I just did a thing. We're withdrawing our complaint. They had invested all sorts of time and money and all sorts of things. And we had to exchange the exhibits. That's how far we'd gotten into it. And I was representing us. And I had gone with one or two little Dollar Tree binders that had exhibits in them. And they gave me a huge box with big binders that had exhibits in them. And I'm sure they were laughing when I showed up with my 2 little binders. But the issue for me was, let my child develop as she can. Don't do it overnight because you don't want to pay for it. So we withdrew that filing. There were ramifications for that. 6 months later, they pulled her IEP, said that she left her autism at the door, which was totally not true. And that led to a whole bunch of different battles. And we filed a second time. And honestly, I can't remember what we filed for the second time. I could go back and look, but what's the point? But we filed the second time, and we withdrew that. And I don't even remember which child it was for, honestly. Anyways, but we withdrew that fairly quickly. And so our third one, there was some pretty big stuff. We could show that she had regressed, that FAPE had not been provided, all sorts of things. And so a funny story about that, a couple of funny stories. We get to the point where we have to exchange exhibits. And I've been working on these binders for 3 months. Yeah, 3 months. And I've got my living room. I've got hundreds of documents that I have to have in a binder, and I have to have one for the hearing officer, one for them, and one set for us. So hundreds of documents times 3 that have to be put in these binders with index tabs, so you can say, okay, look at exhibit 23 or whatever. And I worked really, really hard on that. But it got down to the last day, and I was running behind. And I had really paced myself. And the exhibits were due by 5 o'clock. And I called our attorney and I said, I need 20 more minutes. I can probably get it done, but I've still got to drive there to get it to them. And if you don't have the exhibits there by the deadline, then they can file with the judge to have the whole thing thrown out. So I certainly didn't want that. So I'm hurrying. I've got at the time she would have been 11, my 11-year-old, helping me do a binder. And what's funny about that is she did the binder that was given to the school system, and all of the index tabs were like one or two numbers off. So when we were in the hearing, I would say, oh, exhibit 23, and it would really be like exhibit 19 for them. And they would get so frustrated, which was really kind of funny. It shouldn't be, but it was. But after a while, we figured it out. And I said, oops, that's what happens when you have an 11-year-old help you. But here's the funny story about those exhibits. So I asked for a 30-minute or an hour extension so I could make sure I could get everything to them. My attorney calls their attorney. Sure, we can do that, no problem. The district office closes at 5, but we'll leave the door unlocked, not an issue. So I have my first panic attack ever because I'm freaking out that I'm not going to make it in time. Drive there, get there, there's no lights on in the building at all. My kids are like, Mom, there's nobody here. I'm like, no, I have to go try. I can't just not try. So I go to the door. The main door is unlocked. So I walk in. Of course, there's nobody in the reception area, nothing. I know where the special ed offices are, so I turn and I start walking down the hall. There's no lights on at all. None. I walk down the hall, and all of a sudden I see people sitting in the dark at their desks in the special ed department. Why would you be sitting in the dark? There wasn't a power outage. They were sitting in the dark. I believe the strategy was so that I would think that they weren't there and I wouldn't put in my exhibits, and then they could file that they wanted the whole thing thrown out. But when I saw them sitting in the dark, I was like, and you should have seen the eyes of this one lady. She was like, oh my gosh, she's here. Her eyes got so big. And they're sitting there in the dark. Even the special ed director was sitting in her office in the dark. And they could see the parking lot where I was walking in. So it was like they were doing this on purpose. I can't think of any other reason that they would be sitting in the dark working. and they had their computers on, but no other lights on. And it looked like they had pretty much their full staff there. So it was just absolutely ridiculous. Those are the kinds of games that a school system will play with you. But that is my due process experience. I'm trying to think if I want to tell you any other funny stories from the hearing. Yeah, I hated their attorney. He's a jerk. And it was my turn to be questioned. And he would say to me, did so-and-so do this? And he got me one time because I said yes or I said no or something. And he was like, done, I don't need any more information on that question. So from then on, every time he asked me a question, I know IDEA well. And like I said, I had great recall in that hearing. And so every time he would ask me a question, he would say, did da-da-da-da happen? And I would start with, rather than a yes or a no or whatever, I would say, IDEA 34-300-621 says blah, 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 blah. And so when they did this, they violated it. And so every answer I gave had the citation to show, it didn't just say a yes or a no, so it was a bigger answer than he wanted. And he would get so frustrated and he slammed his hand on the desk and he was like, just answer the question. I said, I did answer the question. And he didn't really like that very much. Another thing was we were able to show regression. And of course, they had a lot of their staff testify, and we were able to show regression even through their own documents. Prior to the hearing, I had gone, if you ever want to get documents from a school system, they will charge you for them, for education records. And so I had said, well, I'll just bring my own copier. I want to see every document that you have on my kid. And so I was there one day in the district offices before the hearing for probably 6 hours. And I just took my little portable copier and 2 reams of paper, and I went through all these boxes that they had of documents, which were so helpful for the hearing, and made copies of them. And so some of their documents actually showed the regression, and some of their documents actually showed a meeting before the IEP meeting and how they were to handle if Mrs. Wallace said this or she said that, whatever. And so it could show that there was predetermination of the IEP. It could show that there truly was regression, that they were doctoring the documents, all sorts of things. And so we were presenting those things to them. And this one, the attorney kept trying to go up by this witness, and I called out, stop tampering with the witness or something. And the hearing officer was like, what? Finally paid attention. And the attorney got really mad. But another thing that happened was we were able to show the regression. And this one person who was testifying kept saying, insignificant. And I would say, or my attorney would say, how is it insignificant that she was here and she's now here with this skill? How is that insignificant? And they would say, insignificant. That's insignificant. And so my family still, I was at the hearing, obviously. Nobody else in my family was, but we sometimes will say, insignificant. It was pretty funny. But like I said, there were people who were able to show their true colors in that hearing. And there was one teacher who actually testified for them, but she validated what I said. And I looked at her knowing the hell that she would probably pay for doing that. And I was so proud of her because she told the truth. And I did find out, we saw her like a year later and she had retired. And I don't know if that was forced or what happened with that, but she had retired. One final story about the hearing. So after they put me through the hell of this for 4 days, and after we rested our case, the hearing officer started to strongly advise them that they should settle, to the point that he had us go into settlement discussions. And they offered to pay our entire bill. Everything, our attorney, our expert witnesses, everything. I think because they thought they were going to lose and because the judge was pushing so hard. And I thought, you jerks, you put me through this for 3 months of hell and 4 days of sitting here with you. And now you're going to be sweet as pie trying to get me to settle because you don't want to be embarrassed. But the one thing that kept me, other than my anger, from settling with them, and this is totally illegal, and it wouldn't hold up in court, but I'd have to go to court to pursue it, is that they said I had to waive my ability to ever sue them again. And I said, there's no way in hell, because I have no guarantee that you're going to do the right thing. And they said, well, if you won't waive your ability to sue us again, then, we don't know that you're really going to try to work with us in the future. And I said, you can't take away my rights to pursue advocating for my children, and I'm not going to do it. And so we did not settle. And the hearing officer did not address everything in his ruling. I believe if he had, there would have been more in our favor. He did give us one minor thing, I think, in our favor, but he basically talked around the issue and tried to say that there wasn't sufficient evidence, but he also did not address every claim that we made, which was totally illegal, but that's a subject for another day. But in closing, I will say to you, I've mentioned how stressful a hearing is. So I go through the 4 days of this, and I'm at the end, and they've just tried to settle with me and be sweet as pie trying to settle with me. And I can see right through them that they're complete snakes. And I'm not going to sign away my rights to sue in the future if I need to. And so I say no. And they're telling me what a wonderful mother I am. And, I've come this far. And, wouldn't it be helpful to have the bills paid and blah, blah, blah. And then it came time for closing arguments. And they were attacking me in the hearing rather than actually addressing the issues. They were attacking me for exercising my rights. In fact, they had a stack of complaints and stuff and said that exercising my rights was like using a weapon with them. And so they started in bad mouthing me again after they'd just been sweet as pie. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I broke down and I went in the back room and I sobbed. And I'm sorry if I cry here, but this will tell you a little bit of the toll that it takes on a family. I went in the back room and I cried. And the special ed director came back. And I have to believe in my heart that she's not a horrible person. I have to do that for my own sanity because I cannot believe that someone would be that wicked. Yes, my husband, he'll tell you differently. But she came back to see me. My attorney couldn't. My attorney needed to be there for the closing arguments. And the special ed director came back and told me as I was crying how very sorry she was that it had come to this point, and how she could tell how much I loved my daughter and how she was so sorry that it had gotten to this point. And I looked at her and I said, I have to be able to look my daughter in the eyes and tell her that I did everything I could for her. And so if that meant going here and having to do all of this, then that's what I needed to do. And she didn't really have a response for that. And that's how I feel that we are as special ed parents. There are some parents who want to know what their rights are, but they're never going to pursue them because they don't like conflict and they don't want this and they don't want that. And I will do a whole video about weighing the options of pursuing dispute resolution versus not, because sometimes it's not worth it. You might be right, but it's not worth it. But then I believe there are parents like me who would sacrifice their own health, their own well-being, their own sanity, their own whatever, to make sure that they did everything they could for their child. And if you are taking the time to watch these videos, and if you are standing up to people who are trying to limit services or tell you that you're wrong or intimidate you when you advocate for your child, then I believe you're one of those parents that would have said the exact same thing. That you have to look your child in the eye and tell them that you did everything you could and you did your very best. And I think of that often as I think about, we say, oh, I tried my best, or I did whatever. I did my very best. Well, I don't take that as lightly anymore. And I can honestly say I did my very best. And I've been ill since that. My husband and the doctors, the condition that I have is caused by trauma. And they believe that it's caused from the stress that I was under with all of this. There's a price to pay, people. There's a price to pay. But like I said, I can look at my daughter, and even though we didn't win, I tried. Nobody else is going to do that. Nobody else is going to fight like that for you. So if you are considering due process, pray about it. If you're a person that prays, pray about it. Weigh it out. Don't take it lightly, because it ruined our relationship with the school system, even though it wasn't great to begin with. And we ended up pulling our kids out of the system for several years. And this is the first year that we've had that child back in the system. And it has followed us, and it's not fun. And I don't ever want to go through it again. Would I do it again? I don't know. I might just pull my kid out, put him in another district. I don't know. But it's a big thing to think about, and I pray and pray and pray that you will not take it lightly. I lucked out with our first filing and getting the aid, to stay in place for as long as we needed. But most of them don't go that way, and they become very, very hostile and mean and stressful, and it takes a huge toll on your family. And so I would just encourage you to research it, spend a little bit of money to talk to an attorney, a special ed attorney, get their advice. Don't go it alone, because they'll eat you alive. And if you ever want to talk to me about it, you can email me. You can try to leave a comment below. As I make this video, there's no comments allowed on YouTube right now, but yeah, just contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you. So sorry that this video got so heavy. There were some funny stories like Insignificant and the sitting in the dark, hoping that I would go away. But yeah, it's a big deal. So if you've not subscribed, if you've made it all the way to this end of this video, I have babbled on for 32 minutes. Thank you for your patience in watching me. And if you've not subscribed, please do so. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. And until next time, make it a great day. Thanks. Bye.